My wife once claimed she was too beautiful to be faithful. Now, she's facing the ugly truth. I filed for divorce and left her broke. I'm 35 and my wife is 34. We've known each other since high school. I had just moved to a new town, and the high school was completely new to me. I was worried I wouldn't fit in, something I think is a pretty reasonable fear. But thankfully, things weren't as bad as I expected. I was able to make friends pretty quickly, which helped me avoid standing out too much. One of the friends I made back then was a girl named Melissa. She was part of the school's photography club, and I met her when she was taking pictures near where I was sitting. The next thing I knew, I was a subject in one of her photos. She still claims today that it's one of her favorite photos of all time, but I always doubt that. Honestly, I hate that I'm writing this right now because it brings back memories from the past. It hurts to think that everything we had is soon going to mean very little to me. Anyway, back on track, Melissa and I became good friends after that. By our senior year, we went from being friends to partners. It just felt right. Even though we went to different colleges in different states, it didn't affect our relationship. We emailed and texted a lot and stayed on the phone as much as we could. Eventually, we got married. That was 10 years ago. Time really does fly. Unsurprisingly, Melissa works as a professional photographer. She owns her own studio and has worked as the official photographer in many cool places over the course of her career. Sometimes, that work took her out of the country or to other states, but I never thought it would be a problem. Now, it's important that I mention this. As I grew older, I started to realize just how incredibly beautiful Melissa is. Back then, I thought she was cute, but her looks weren't the main reason I befriended her, dated her, and eventually married her. It was all about her personality back then. But now, I realize how lucky I was to be with someone so gorgeous. The only problem with dating someone extremely attractive is that you need to be secure. Let's just say I wasn't that secure at the start of our relationship. It always felt like other men were just one step away from taking her from me. But she was very reassuring in the beginning, and after some time, I stopped worrying about who she worked with. Let's just say I wasn't secure at the start of our relationship. It always felt like other men were just one step away from taking my girl and having her cheat on me. But she was extremely reassuring in the early years and very open. So after some time, I stopped worrying about who she worked with and all that jazz. Now, as we've gotten older, I feel like my wife started to change. Not necessarily in a negative way, but it seemed like a mild form of a midlife crisis. She began to worry more about her legacy, and despite never wanting children, we must have had at least 10 conversations where she second-guessed that decision. She even asked me if she should freeze her eggs. At first, I said no, but by the third time we talked about it, I realized it wasn't just a passing urge, so I suggested she go ahead with it, which she eventually did. When she started going to the gym, I thought it was because she was afraid of getting out of shape and looking older. She still looked beautiful to me, but there's really no reason to discourage someone from going to the gym since it helps in the long run. So, I embraced the change. I've always been an active person. I run a lot in cycle. So it actually made me happy that she was getting more involved in fitness. However, the real problem started when she began hanging out with some women she met at the gym. She told me all about them. 3 women in total. One was married and in her mid-30s, while the other 2 were unmarried and in their early 20s. I didn't think there was anything wrong with being friends with people much younger than you, but the issue arose when they started spending a lot of time together in ways that were stereotypically youthful. My wife, who normally liked to drink wine, read books, or watch movies, was now talking about going bar hopping, hitting the club, and having all sorts of girls' night outs. At first, I didn't think it would become a regular habit, so I encouraged her to go out on the first and second occasions, even the third time, if I recall correctly. But then I realized it was becoming almost a weekly thing, and I didn't like that. Truth be told, I think a married woman should only participate in certain nighttime activities when she's with her husband. There's very little good that can come from it otherwise. I'm not a wimp by any means, but when I realized these outings were becoming a regular habit, I had to put my foot down and tell her to stop. As much as I trusted her, I started to worry about the kind of things those environments might expose her to and the influence they could have on her. I didn't even know those gym girls very well, so I had no idea what kind of lifestyles they led, and whether that would negatively affect Melissa, especially considering how much she had been embracing going out and hanging out. Obviously, my request didn't go over well with her, and the situation turned into a messy argument. I'm not proud of it, but I told her she was going through a midlife crisis. She called me a controlling, insecure a-hole. In short, it was one of those extremely messy arguments that happen in relationships, and it was clear she wasn't going to listen to me. She ended up going out that night, even though she had previously told me she wasn't going to. It was clearly done to spite me, or at least to get away from me. When she came back later than usual, she pretty much avoided me. She took a shower and then went to bed. By the time I entered the room, she was already sleeping, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something had happened that night. If I know women, many of them tend to make poor decisions when they're angry at you, as some sort of revenge. If she did something that night, she probably felt like it was a way to get back at me. I couldn't stop thinking about it. I know I was being paranoid, but I decided to swipe her phone while she was sleeping. I had never done that before, but at that moment, it seemed like the best time to take that risk. It was scary doing it, but I'm so glad I did. She mostly chats on Messenger, so that was the first place I went to after unlocking her phone. I saw a group chat named Fit and Fears. I cringed just as much as you probably are right now, but I didn't have time to fully embrace that cringe because the messages were something else. Any group chat made public could easily send people to jail, and they were being incredibly open, including my wife. One message immediately caught my eye as I was scrolling, and it was from that night. At first, I felt bad, but then I saw the rest of her message, and I stopped caring. I felt bad at first, but as soon as I walked in and saw him, I didn't care anymore. He's trying to control the wrong person, and honestly, I'm too beautiful to be faithful. I've been tied down to him my whole life, and I've never really gotten to use my beauty the way most women do. Let me get attention. Let me get favors. After that, the other girls in the group encouraged her, asking if he was hot, if he was big. The way I felt, it still pains me. It's a tight ache in my chest, still so vivid, despite happening over a week ago. It felt like everything was crumbling around me. I thought her going out was going to be one of those minor inconveniences that we'd eventually settle and get back to normal. But it was the end of our marriage. This was someone I had known for 20 years, someone I thought I would be with forever, and she had felt trapped the entire time. Or at least, I interpreted it that way. It crushed me, but I guess it's just me being a sap. The bottom line is, all the messages pointed to her cheating, and she was unremorseful about it. She'd probably do it again. It's possible this wasn't the first time. Maybe it had already happened before, maybe even early in our relationship. It seemed like being with one man in a stable, loving relationship since her teenage years was more of a punishment than a prize. Is this how most women think? I'm so confused. I completely forgot to take screenshots at the time because I was so overwhelmed. My mood was off the next day, but she didn't bother to ask what was wrong, probably because our fight was still lingering. That night, I managed to grab more evidence from her phone, including additional messages where she described how everything went down, how good it was, and how she couldn't even remember his name, followed by laughs. As if it was something to be proud of. I was shattered. I still am. I don't know what to do anymore. I know I can't move forward with someone like her. I've already wasted too many years of my life. But I need to hurt her. I don't want to cheat back because I'm better than that. I've kept my marriage unsoiled for 10 years, and I'll continue to keep it that way. But I need her to feel the pain. I'm done being the beggar. Honestly, your feelings are completely valid, Opie. You could expose everything to those who matter to her. The betrayal doesn't just hurt you. It's a reflection of who she truly is. And sometimes people need to face the truth of their actions. She has to face what she's done. After months of suspicion, the narrator finally confronted his wife, Melissa, when he had enough evidence to prove she had been cheating. One night, when she returned home, he noticed the signs: alcohol on her breath, a strange male perfume, and her attempt to avoid any closeness. When he confronted her, she dismissed his concerns with a simple nothing, which only fueled his frustration. Overcome by anxiety and anger, he confronted her directly about the affair. He unleashed all his pent-up emotions, accusing her of everything he had been holding back, mocking her, questioning her decisions, and calling her out for her infidelity. In response, Melissa offered little more than a blank stare before breaking down in tears. He stood over her, venting his rage, not wanting to be violent, but needing to release the anger she had caused. In the end, he told her to pack her things and leave. She resisted, crying on the floor, but he packed her essentials into a suitcase and arranged for an Uber to take her to her mother's house. A few days later, he served her with divorce papers, ignoring her desperate calls. As the divorce proceedings dragged on, Melissa became increasingly vindictive, trying to make his life difficult with threats and unreasonable demands. But the narrator had been smart, safeguarding his finances and preparing evidence of her infidelity. The judge ruled in his favor, granting him a favorable settlement. Melissa's attempts to contact him after the divorce were met with silence, leaving her to face the consequences of her actions. The narrator, now free from the turmoil, felt a sense of relief and closure, knowing that the painful chapter was finally over and that justice had been served. After the divorce was finalized, Melissa's attempts to make life difficult for the narrator only added to her own downfall. She sent threatening text messages in the middle of the night, accusing him of ruining her life. On one occasion, the security cameras even caught her parked across the street at 3 a.m. instead of accepting a fair settlement. She and her lawyer demanded an absurd amount of money, hoping to drain his resources. But the narrator had planned ahead. Knowing the divorce was coming, he had worked with his lawyer to shield his money. Though not all of it could be hidden, a significant portion was safely tucked away. He wasn't just protecting his own finances. He also intended to take as much of hers as possible. Melissa had been a successful photographer with substantial earnings, and the narrator, feeling justified by her betrayal, was determined to claim a share. Armed with evidence of her infidelity and harassment, he aimed to not only take a sizable amount of her wealth, but also make her cover his legal fees. The evidence was overwhelming. Melissa's actions had been documented, from the harassment to her selfish demands, and the judge's side to their case was known to be tough. The narrator's lawyer was confident things were going their way, and they were right. When the judge ruled, Melissa was left with almost nothing. She kept her car, which she quickly sold, but it wasn't long before her financial situation deteriorated. Since she had never been great at saving, her money dried up fast. The narrator, who preferred a lump sum over alimony, ensured she received as little as possible. Soon after the divorce, Melissa tried calling him, drunk, lamenting how much she missed him and how her life had fallen apart. He let her talk, finding it somewhat entertaining, but ended the call without saying a word. Now, the tables had turned. She was the one left scrambling, facing the consequences of her actions. He didn't want her back. He was on top, enjoying the high ground. As satisfying as it was to see her struggle, the narrator couldn't help but hope that she learned something from the mess she had created. This victory was bittersweet. While he had sought justice, he also recognized that, in the end, both parties would carry scars from the experience. But as it stood, the tables had finally turned, and Melissa was the one dealing with the fallout of her choices.